Welcome to Strategies for a Successful RTP File. This is a workshop for RTP candidates, and you'll be hearing from myself and Simone Washington from Faculty Affairs. I am working with just one screen in here where I am today, so I'm probably not going to be able to monitor the chat as closely as I would like. But I think maybe Simone can help out with that too if there's anything that pops up that's super urgent. So the first thing that we want to talk about is RTP, right? What is RTP? Hopefully we all know already, but just to refresh, since we have so many acronyms here at Cal State Long Beach, when we're talking about RTP, we mean retention, tenure, and promotion. So the steps that you move through as tenure line faculty: retention when you are kept in your position after the third year, tenure typically at your sixth year, promotion when you're promoted to associate professor along with your tenure, and then promotion again when you're promoted from associate professor to full professor. So that's what we're talking about when we say RTP. So where can you find information about the RTP process? Number one, your most important stop is your department. And here, obviously, your department chair and also colleagues. Second stop, your college associate dean's office or your dean's office. And we have prepared, Simone has prepared a handout for you that I'll share out after this that tells you your RTP coordinators in your college. You can reach out to them as well. Number three suggestion for who you might want to get advice from in the RTP process, I think this is most important, it was for me as a candidate, is our colleagues who have been through the RTP process and or served on RTP committees. For me, I did this back when we were still using paper files. I actually had colleagues' copies and I got to look at their entire file. So that's really helpful. And then, of course, the Faculty Affairs website. And I'll be sort of taking you through that today. All the links in this PowerPoint are live links. And again, I'll be sharing it out afterwards, so you'll be able to follow through with what we're looking at. So the place you want to start on the Faculty Affairs website is what we call our RTP instructional memo. So this is one single document. It's really a page more with drop-down menus. But within this, you're going to find all the different numbers here, 1 through 13. That is essentially all the information you need for your RTP file. So today, I'm going to go over this with you, and hopefully it will make a little more sense because there is a ton of information here. So the first question, and especially now that we're in the situation where we just redid our RTP policies in 2023, 2024, people have a lot of questions about which policies apply to me, et cetera, et cetera. As I'm sure you know, all of us are reviewed under 3 policies: our department policy, which is the most specific to our discipline, our college policy, which is somewhat specific, but not as much as our department, and then, of course, the university policy, which is our broadest policy, which has to be that way so it can apply to everyone. Based on implementation guidelines outlined by our academic senate, all faculty hired before the 24-25 academic year will be reviewed under prior policies. Please also see the update provided by the Executive Committee of Academic Senate and Faculty Affairs for further information on this. If you're starting this year in the 25-26 academic year, you are automatically going to be reviewed under the new RTP policy. For faculty members in a department without an approved policy, and there are some departments where the RTP policy got stuck up in the approval process. In this case, the university and college policies will govern their reviews. There will be no governing department policy until a department policy has been formally approved at all levels: department, tenured and probationary faculty, college faculty council, dean, and provost. Once a policy has been approved, it will become effective the following year. In 2026, 2027, so next academic year, all revised university, college, and department policies will be in effect. However, should you wish to be reviewed under the prior versions of policies during this year only, you may request that. And let me stop for a second here and ask if anyone, I know this is a part that we tend to have a lot of questions on. Did anybody have any questions about this specific issue of the policies that Simone and I can try to answer right now, or we can refer you later? Okay, great. Okay. So, oh yes, Belinda, go ahead.
My question is, if you're reviewing a file, does it indicate which policy the candidate is following, or should you make that assumption based on their year of hire?
That's a great question, Belinda, and I do not know the answer to that right now, but we are having a workshop for evaluators later in the fall, in the next couple weeks. So we'll be able to answer that question at that point for you or prior. I'm going to make a note of that.
So the answer is that the candidates this year have been asked to upload the policy that they want to be reviewed in. So it's going to be part of the candidate material that you receive after September 23rd if you're at the department level for evaluation.
Perfect.
So Chris here, my understanding is that yes, even if you were hired before that year, you can request review under the new policies.
I'm not sure the answer to that. Simone, did you know?
So any clarifying questions regarding new versus old policy should be directed towards the AVP of Faculty Affairs. And I have put her email address in the chat for you.
Yeah, or you can always email me with that kind of question and I will forward it for you.
Just say you actually have a choice in your interfolio. If you have a choice, they give you a choice. Like there's a button and you get to choose. So if you fall into a category where you get to decide whether to be reviewed under old or new, you'll know when you log into your interfolio packet because it actually gives you that tick box at the top. Because I have that in mine.
Great, good. And I'll talk a little bit about the difference or the sort of improvements in the new policy, which I hope will be useful to everyone.
So if I could just clarify really quickly, all of the RTP candidate files have that policy selection form. So having the form in the candidate packet doesn't automatically mean that each person has the option to choose. It's just a place to upload the policy that you will be reviewed under. So still adhering to the guidelines of whether or not you can use the new or the old. Either way, you have to upload the correct RTP policy that will be guiding your evaluation in that section. I hope that's clear.
Thanks, Simone. And we can also always take questions by email afterwards as well to either myself or Simone, directly to Faculty Affairs. And of course, if we can't answer any questions, we will find out the answer for you. So, information sessions. I just prepared this slide for you all with our helpful RTP workshops that we have coming up. So this Friday on Zoom, we have Avoiding Unintentional Bias, a workshop for RTP evaluators and hiring committees with Amy Wax from the psychology department. And she's also doing an in-person session on September 30th. Ideas for equity and department RTP policies. I think we may not be running that Zoom, but we will be making a recording of it available. That workshop is based on thinking about central ways that we can promote equity in our RTP policies, largely accounting for cultural and identity taxation, equitable use of student perceptions of teaching forms, and imagining or reviewing our scholarship along a continuum, so we can include scholarship of engagement and scholarship of teaching and learning. So if you had any questions about that information, I'm happy to share out the recording and any documents that we have that go along with it. So you can just reach out to me for that. We have our Interfolio Open Lab session on the 18th. Another workshop coming up for RTP committee members, promoting equity in the RTP review process. Again, we'll have one in person on October 14th and one on Zoom on October 20th. And then finally, Simone is running Tenure Track Faculty Evaluation 101. So I did see that several people who are registered were in their first few years here. It's great to attend this workshop now and start to get your head around the RTP process. But you may also want to check out this workshop on the early stages of faculty evaluation. And when you get this PowerPoint, you can click through on the link here and register for all of these workshops. So our deadlines. What are our deadlines for RTP? As you know, on the 22nd, your files are due to the department committee. And then about a week after that, your department committee and chair evaluations are due. You have different deadlines for rebuttals of reviews, and we'll talk more about that later. The college committee review is due by February 2nd. The dean's review is due by April 6th. And the provost review or final decision should be made known to you by June 1st. Simone, did you want to add in about the different deadlines really quickly?
Yes, so there is a different set of deadlines for the promotion only reviews that are not listed here, but they can be found on our website. And so I will share the link here. And the background there is that evaluators had requested a little more time to evaluate. So our solution to that was to make a separate set of deadlines for department, college, and dean level reviews for the promotion only cases. So so I will share the deadlines page with you shortly in the chat.
Thank you, Simone.
Sure.
Okay, so let's go to mandatory reviews and optional reviews. Excuse me. Some reviews you have no choice to undergo, and others you have some control over when you do them. But of course, my advice to everyone is to go up for your tenure and promotion as soon as you are able, because why not get the salary increase? So it's mandatory to submit for year 3 when you're up for reappointment and tenure in year 6. If needed, you can request an extension from Faculty Affairs for your tenure. Again, I think an important thing that we want to remind you of is that this is an anxiety-filled process for a lot of people. Even if you know you're in a good position, it's still nerve-wracking. However, as a university, it is our mission to tenure and promote the people who we hire. So there are exceptions every year, people who are not given tenure or promotion, but it's very few. So as a university, we are trying very much to keep you here because we brought you here for a reason. So what are the optional reviews? It's optional to go up for promotion to full professor 5 years after your tenure. Again, as I said, it's highly recommended if you feel that you will meet the benchmarks to go up for promotion to full, because why not get that salary increase, 9% salary increase on the baseline. But if you don't want to be considered for promotion to full, all you have to do is contact Faculty Affairs. This doesn't hurt you or look bad in any way. It just means you're choosing to stay at that associate level for longer. And then, of course, also optional is going up for early tenure or promotion. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. You can see the university RTP policy for guidelines. And if you want to do that, you have to submit your notice of intent in August. So the RTP file, what do I put in it? These are sort of the basic pieces of your RTP file. Your candidate status sheet, your professional data sheet, and your CV. Again, these vary by college, so you want to look at your college policy for what the actual requirements are. But this is sort of the baseline here. And the professional data sheet, yes, it's basically rewriting your CV in a different format. Your narrative, that's the story you're telling of how and why you deserve tenure and promotion at Cal State Long Beach. So that's certainly a very important piece of this. You're going to create an index of your supplementary materials. You're going to have any additional documents required by your college and or your department. You will have student evaluation summaries. So not every single student evaluation form that was submitted rating your course, but the summaries of how you're rated throughout the entire class. You will have, of course, documented evidence supporting your 3 areas of evaluation: instruction and instructionally related activities, your RISCA or your research, scholarly, and creative activity, and your service. You'll also have in your RTP file any prior reviews and any rebuttals. Let me stop for a second and see if we have questions right now before I move forward. Okay, great. So the next thing I want to talk about is open period, which actually has already ended for this year. But open period is something that confuses a lot of faculty. So we'll try to explain it for you now. So open period is a period that allows other faculty, students, administrators, and staff, and even people from the Long Beach community to submit statements and opinions about the person being reviewed. Open period has a specific time frame each year, and this year it was August 22nd to September 12th. Open period is announced when the department office posts a notice for candidates undergoing RTP action, inviting community members to contribute letters. So you may have seen something like this in your own department office. That's just how you know that open period is going on. So open period submissions, there are 2 really important pieces to remember about them. One, they cannot be anonymous. So someone cannot anonymously write a horrible letter about you and submit it to your file, which is good for you. And secondly, open period submissions cannot be solicited by the candidate. So even though when I was up for tenure, there was a sign in the history department office, Professor Emily Berkowitz is going up for tenure, you can submit a letter regarding her case. I was not able to go to my students and directly ask them if they would submit a letter for me. This has to be done as an announcement in the classroom by somebody else, an announcement in the department, possibly even communication by your chair, but the candidate themselves are not able to request open period submissions. You will get 5 days notice from your department committee before any open period materials would be placed in your file. And during that time, you're able to respond or rebut to any open period material. Also, please remember, your open period material is going to be placed in a separate section of the RTP file, of your interfolio file, and you can only get open period material removed because it is inaccurate. I think another place of confusion here is that open period letters are not letters of support solicited by the candidate. So for example, when I was up for tenure and promotion, I asked colleagues in the field to submit letters of support talking about my research and how it contributed to my area of study. So those letters were not open period letters because I went ahead and asked for them directly. So they would be called external evaluations, and they will be included in the supplemental materials section of our files. So let me take questions now. Go ahead, Asan, did I say that right?
Yes. Hi, Emily. Thanks
Hi.
for the informative conversation we have here. One question I have is about the open period letters. If I received an open period letter from the RTP on the third year evaluation, should I place it when I am place it into my portfolio profile when I'm going for the tenure, or is it document I choose to put it or not to put it on that evaluation period?
Okay, so you're talking about an open period letter that you received during a prior action, not the
Correct.
one going right now. Okay, I think I know the answer, but I'm going to defer to Simone because this is her area of specialization, what goes in the files.
Thanks. Hi, Simone.
Hi, so open period letters that you have already submitted for prior review will not be part of your current packet because the only thing that you're adding to the prior evaluation section is the recommendations that you got from the department and college level, and then the decisions from your dean or the provost. So that's what that section is for. So you wouldn't be using any letters from any prior evaluations because they've already been evaluated, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions at this time? Okay, great. Um, so open period, let me make sure. Okay, so the next thing we want to talk about is adding things to your file after your file is submitted, which of course happens, right? So how can you do this? What might you add after your file has been submitted? For example, new teaching evaluations or supplemental information about your RISCA. For example, notice of a publication being accepted. Anything that you want to add after your file has been submitted needs to be approved by your college RTP committee. And when you include these new materials after the college RTP committee gives you permission, your entire file then returns to the department committee for their review before it moves back into the rest of the review process. At the same time, if your evaluators ever find that your file is missing information, at any point, they can request the missing material. However, the addition of this material triggers the return to the level at which you should have provided the information in the first place. So for example, say I forgot to put the student evaluation summaries in my file. The college committee notices that, they are going to send my file back to the department and have me input my student evaluation summaries at that point. And then we will hop back into the process. Another important thing that candidates often have questions about are your opportunities to respond and rebut to your different reviews. So how does this work? Each time you're reviewed, you're going to receive a copy of each review. And if you're just starting out in this process, of course, I highly recommend that you save copies of all your reviews. Now they'll be a little easier because they'll all be electronic. Keep those for yourself. We have them too, but you're highly advised to keep them. So once you receive a review, you have the right to either respond, which is more like clarifying, a little more gentle, or rebut, as in challenge the review. And each response or rebuttal that you make will be placed into your file. At each level of review, you have 10 days from the day on which you receive the evaluation to respond or rebut to the review. If you respond or rebut, your evaluation deadline doesn't change. And if you wish, you always have the option to schedule a meeting to discuss the evaluation. Please note, your responses and rebuttals should be addressed to the next level of review. So for example, if there was something in your department review that you wanted to respond to or to rebut, you're going to address your response to the next level up in the process, which is going to be your college RTP committee. If you receive a review late and do not have 10 calendar days before your file moves on to the next level of review, you still can take those 10 calendar days to respond or rebut. It's just important to know that your file is still moving on through the process following the original deadlines. And just because you choose to respond or rebut does not mean that you can include new materials. If you wish to include new materials, you must follow the steps discussed in number 7, our previous slide. Let me see if anybody has questions right now before we move on. Okay, thank you. Talking about external evaluations. I think this is confusing to some people because external evaluations operate really differently here than at most universities. We do not do external evaluations. They are not required. You may have heard from your friends, they're stressing, who am I going to find to review my file, et cetera, et cetera. We just don't do that here. But you are, of course, allowed to solicit external reviews of the RISCA portion of your file. So again, this is entirely optional. I chose to do this just because I thought people who work in my field could better explain the importance of my contributions to my field. So if you're going to do this, you reach out to your reviewers. If you're initiating the external review process, you say, I'd like to request a letter from you reviewing my RISCA. And when you're doing this, you are going to follow the Academic Senate Policy External Evaluation of RISCA, which is linked here. So that's an external evaluation that is prompted by the candidate. However, any party in the RTP process can also initiate an external review of a file. So for example, that could be your chair, your dean, or a different member of your committee. So once this happens, a new section titled Internal External Evaluation, yes, that's the real title, is created in your interfolio case. And remember, an external review can be requested at any point in the process, but it has to be approved by both the president and the candidate. And the request must include a description of the special circumstances necessitating an external evaluation. That's sort of a lot of information there. So let me stop and see if anybody has questions about that, the external evaluations, candidate inspired or sort of mandated by other policies. Violetta, yes.
Yes. What would be the point of option, since it's optional for us, what would be the point of
Right.
an review?
Sure, yeah. So when I did this, I thought, well, my department didn't have another specialist in Latin American history who shared my expertise. So I solicited reviews from people who were more familiar with my work and its place in the field. So that would tend to be a reason that you would do that. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend doing if you don't think it's going to be positive, right? You want to have people who are going to support you and really just help provide more context. Just because, you know, we're not an R1 university with 5 historians of Latin American history, for example, in my case. So I found it useful to bring in some other voices just to help the committee understand.
Got it. So this could serve as a benefit if I wanted to apply for tenure.
Exactly.
Okay. Got it. Thank you. I have a lot of questions, but I don't want to take up time.
We'll definitely have time for questions at the end too.
Okay, perfect.
Anyone
Thank you.
else right now? Okay. So, evaluators, who evaluates your file? Each file is evaluated by the following: your department RTP committee, your college RTP committee, your dean, and the provost. Department chair evaluations are optional. So here, for example, you may have a chair who says, I'm going to do an evaluation of everyone who's up for an RTP action this year, and then you include that. But you may also have a situation in your department, we heard about this the last time we did this workshop, where the department chair is serving on the department RTP committee. In that case, the department chair is not allowed to write a review of you. But that's not going to hurt your file. That's why department chair evaluations are optional. Questions on that one? Okay, great. So Interfolio is the platform we use for our evaluations. And I know I hear sometimes some grumbling about Interfolio, but as someone who was hired way back in 2007, I'll tell you that I found Interfolio infinitely easier to use than the old way of having 7 different binders and making all these photocopies and carrying around paper. So please be patient with Interfolio. Overall, it's a much better experience. So I'll turn it over to Simone in a minute to see if she has anything to add, because she is our Interfolio expert. But she also created a step-by-step Interfolio guide that I've linked here for you that will help you get through the program. And we also have Interfolio video tutorials. Other tips: please start uploading your material as soon as you receive access to your candidate packet. We do not recommend that you wait until the deadline day, because everyone else is also late and trying to upload all their material, and that might mean the system is going really slow, or you're having problems and your file ends up being late. So we recommend you get started on that right away. And another important tip: Interfolio works best with the Google Chrome search engine. Simone, did you have anything you wanted to add about Interfolio at this time?
Nope, those were the main tips. I did add the link to the other Interfolio resources that are on our webpage. That includes a PDF of with screenshots on step-by-step how to navigate in Interfolio. There's also video of the same thing in case you wanted to watch like visually how to do the steps. There are also webinars that you can like on demand watch them. And then I also added the PDF tips for RTP candidates, which includes more resources, best practices, and tech tips, including the one that Emily just mentioned.
Thank you so much, Simone. Did anyone have any quick questions about Interfolio? Okay, great. So the narrative. This is, of course, one of the most important parts of your file. This is where you get to tell your story of what you've done at the beach and how you've contributed to our community. So we definitely recommend you start with your college RTP policy to get parameters for your narrative. Why? Because different colleges have made different decisions. For example, some colleges have very strict page limits, others do not. So you definitely want to start with your college RTP policy. Pro tip: to be specific with your accomplishments. So don't just tell us that you served on a certain committee. Tell us what exactly you worked on and how your work was received. you want to focus on showing what came to fruition from your different efforts. Another thing that you want to remember in your narrative is that committees like to see change over time. Our policies allow for you to show that you have improved your work since you started teaching or since your last review. And that's an important thing that you want to discuss. And also, we encourage you to prepare a narrative that aligns with the order of materials included in your file. What I mean by that is, when you look on Interfolio, what order is it asking you to upload your materials in? I suggest you write your narrative in that same order. I am going to close out of this for a second and see, I think I missed a slide. Okay, this is an important one. I glossed over these two. Let me go back a little bit, so sorry. Our RTP policies. So here are the links for where you can find the different policies. You can find them all on the Faculty Affairs website. The central one that you want to pay attention to is what we're calling our new university-wide policy, but it's not all that new anymore because it was created in 2023, 2024. But there's where you can find it. And I'll talk next about how the new policy is different from the old policy because it's a big improvement in a lot of ways. Another thing that you're going to want to think about when you are looking at these policies is our California Faculty Association Union, our collective bargaining agreement, particularly Article 15. Article 15 governs the implementation of our RTP policies. So the university writes the RTP policy, and the California Faculty Association Union, our collective bargaining agreement, explains how it can and should be implemented. And then finally, of course, your college and department RTP policies. Now here you may have questions. If your college and your department were timely and stayed on top of this process, their policies should already be finalized and approved. And all of our RTP policies that have been finalized and approved can be found at the link listed there. If you go there and find that your college and or department RTP policy is not there, that may mean that it's still undergoing revision. What should you do? You should check with your chair and your college dean to be sure you have the correct information. Questions on this? Okay, great. Then let me just talk really quickly about the difference with our new university-wide RTP policy. Our committee from across the university really worked with cutting-edge principles of how to promote equity and inclusion in higher ed. So we're really proud of all the collective work that people did. And this is going to make the RTP process more transparent and hopefully smoother for all the different kinds of faculty who make up our community. So first, I want you to know that our new RTP policy aims to promote equity and allow flexibility in interpretation. We're making a special point to say everyone doesn't have to be exactly the same. There is room for all of us at the beach, and there's value in how all of us contribute. Our new RTP policy values diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. It also, and this is important, is cutting edge in recognizing the existence of cultural and or identity taxation. In case you're not familiar with that term, to paraphrase really quickly, what we mean by cultural or identity or even race-based taxation is the idea that in any given department, certain students may feel that they are more likely to go to a certain professor because of a group they identify with, because of the way they look, etc. So that person who represents this group that's that's a special group for the students is going to be asked to do more things, right? And the same thing will happen with committees. A department will say, oh, we don't have any XYZ people serving on this committee. Can you do it, right? This is this invisible labor that our colleagues who are colleagues of color, who are differently abled, who are LGBTQ plus, et cetera, it's additional labor that they are asked to do, sometimes expected to do, and sometimes feel that they have to do. And we understand as a university that this makes the job and the workload of these individuals more serious than others of us who may not face the same taxation. So our policy wants to recognize this and give you space to talk about it, because that means if you're spending 3 times as long in office hours, because every student who identifies themselves as part of the same group that you're from comes to your office, whereas I don't have those students coming to my office, right? Then you're doing additional labor. That's not necessarily reflected in your pay scale, but we want to make sure that your additional labor can be accounted for in the RTP process. Our new RTP policy also is cutting edge because it recognizes and celebrates our faculty mentoring, our role as mentoring young people, not only within our discipline, so how are we teaching them the skills of business administration or being a English major, but also how are we mentoring them sometimes outside of the classroom, maybe through clubs, maybe informally. And we're also looking for formative feedback. We want to see how you are using your students' feedback in order to shape what you're doing in the classroom. Another thing that our new university RTP policy does that's such a great improvement from our prior one and is very cutting edge across higher ed is that we now recognize what we like to call a continuum of scholarship, or the existence of different forms of RISCA, again, research, scholarly, and creative activity. Now, what do I mean by this? I can take my own
帮
discipline.
你找耳机，对吗，宝贝？
If everyone could
好，我
please
帮你找了，桌子上
mute their mics,
放，还有
that would be great. Thank you so much. The different forms of RISCA. So for example, in history, the gold standard is obviously peer-reviewed publications. But now that we have a broader understanding of what scholarship might be, perhaps there's someone in the history department who is not publishing in the American Historical Review, our flagship peer-reviewed publication, but maybe they're publishing in journals about teaching and pedagogy. Therefore, they're engaging in a different kind of scholarship, right? They're engaging in the scholarship of teaching and learning. Now we're able to evaluate that as well under our new RTP policy. So this is really great. If your RISCA is non-traditional, we're obviously moving away from that term, but I'm paraphrasing here. If your RISCA, fits in that way, you have ways to share it out now and for your committees to evaluate you. The next one is not really different. All faculty were always expected to contribute to shared governance, but we want to reiterate that now, that the university is a community of faculty and of students, and that in order to be successful, we need to share in that work. Our new RTP policy also emphasizes continuous professional development. And this is where I come in and the faculty center in some ways, right? We want to see change over time, growth in your work on campus. So one of the ways you can show that you've had continuous professional development would be to talk about any faculty center workshops or other workshops that you attend that helped you to contribute more to your campus in terms of teaching, RISCA, or service. Perhaps you joined some of our faculty center groups, like the Faculty Formative Feedback Project or the Inclusive Excellence in Pedagogy Faculty Learning Community. Those types of things are, again, examples of your continuous professional development. And finally, as a reminder, and this is really no different from our prior policy, it's just outlined more clearly now, that all faculty are evaluated in the same 3 areas, of course, right? Our instruction, or teaching, our RISCA or research, and our service. However, we want to make clear now that the weights assigned to each can vary by the candidate's strengths and or the department, college, or university needs. So our new policy is much more open-minded, right? We do have some faculty who overwhelmingly focus on, say, service to the community. That's an important part of what makes up Cal State Long Beach. So under our new policy, we're able to recognize and celebrate that. So let me pause for a minute and see if anybody has any questions about the new RTP policy versus the old, or anything like that.
May I have a question on something you just said, Emily, about the service? So if previously we were always encouraged to have service at all levels and kind of manage it, but if we have an imbalance, but there's still a large amount of service that can't be used as sort of a thing, so to speak. I'm trying to use the appropriate RTP words, but I'm trying to understand, sort of given your example of what you said about outward or community service.
Yeah. So Marissa, are you asking like if someone's file is stronger in RISCA and instruction than in service? Or are you asking if their service is more service to the community outside of the campus?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So within the domain of service, sorry, to be clear.
Right. Yeah. Within the domain of service, you also can include service to the profession and service to the community. So I think I'll touch on that a little more later, but again, I can use an example from my own file. I did a lot of service to the profession, right? Journal editing, reviewing of manuscripts, et cetera, et cetera. And then when I was preparing my file, I had the choice to decide where to include that, right? Did I want to include it with my RISCA? Or did I want to include it with my service? Because service was my least strong area of my file at that time, I chose to put it in there. So we have flexibility for where we're placing things. And again, community service, community being the campus community, but also the broader Long Beach community or even the Southern California community, that is recognized now under the new RTP policy. Did I answer that, Marissa, or was there more clarification?
No, but maybe it's more specific and I can save it for the end to kind of
Okay.
tease it. Yeah, thank you.
May
You're
I
welcome.
may I follow up?
Yeah.
I think I'm wondering, can a very, very strong service aspect of your performance, can very strong service compensate for very minimal research, for example?
Yeah. This is an implementation question, right? Which I can't answer because I'm not on your committee. I know of individuals on campus who have had really outstanding service and not a lot of RISCA, but that is really just going to depend on how your department and how your committees review you. So if someone is wondering about that for themselves, I would say the best place to start getting answers to that question would be just talking informally with your department chair. A rule of thumb that I've heard in my 18 years on campus is that it's pretty common for candidates to have really 2 areas of their file that are their best, right? It's pretty impossible to be totally outstanding in all 3. However, I think teaching is sort of the one non-negotiable, right? We all want to be strong in teaching. And then whether we're strong in RISCA or service, I would say first defer to your department chair and your department culture, because that department review is really the one that sort of sticks with you the most, right? Your department reviews you, they know you the most, they know where you fit into your discipline. And that review is the basis of what the college committee uses, which is the basis of what the dean uses, which is the basis of what the provost uses, right? Your file is completely read at each level, but that department review is sort of what starts it off. So I highly recommend that you make sure that you are aligned with what your department expects. I know that wasn't maybe a direct answer to that question. I don't think we can really get a whole lot more specific than that. Simone, did you have anything to add on that one?
I apologize. I've been answering questions in the chat. What
Oh,
was the
okay.
question?
The question was about what if we have a file where someone is really strong in service, but
Mhm.
not that strong in RISCA? And my answer was check with your department because department cultures are different.
Yes, I think that's the best course of action. You did mention in our prior workshop that there used to be a sense of it being equal across the board, but now there's an understanding that one can be heavier than the other because maybe that's just how your time weighed out. And so that's part of the consideration as well, but definitely your department chair or associate dean can give further guidance.
Thanks, Simone. Did that answer the question?
It did, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. And Shirya, did you have a question?
Yes, yes. Thank you so much for this workshop. I wanted to ask if I were to select the prior university-wide policy, because I've selected like everything for the old policy, did I still delineate some of these things that is being very beautifully mentioned in the new policy, but it's not as explicit in the old policy in my narrative?
You can. I mean, and this is sort of an issue of our campus culture is changing. So people are more open to this. But if you are, say, personally concerned about having experienced cultural or identity taxation and how that has, impacted you, I would highly recommend going with the new policy. I mean, just as a former candidate, I think the new policy is so much better than the old policy. So I think if you have the option, I would just choose the new one. It's simpler, it's easier to use, and again, it's just much more equitable and transparent, in my opinion.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Okay, let me get back to where we are. Okay, so now we have some further tips for your narrative. So how are you going to talk about your instruction and instructionally related activities? I think first I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that we've retitled this category, instruction and instructionally related activities. So what that means is our new policy and our university sees you now as teaching or instructing not only when you're in the classroom, right? Instruction takes place in many contexts. Of course, it can be in class, but it also happens in any other way you contribute to student success, including chairing theses or honors committees, independent study, involving students in RISCA, mentoring, advising. There's probably 500 other things that I didn't even think of here. So you can think broadly about that. Another thing that many new faculty do, right, is create new classes in their areas of expertise or update curriculum, update the standard course outlines. Those are both important instruction and instructionally related activities. In general, our new RTP policy emphasizes 3 principles that guide our values. And so you want to think about these. If I were you, I would think about directly addressing them in your narrative. So 1, continuous professional learning. Again, what we mean here, professional development, faculty-centered programming, department programming, college programming, things to help you with your pedagogy, your mentoring. Also, you will want to discuss thoughtful reflection on and subsequent adaptation of instruction. This is a big difference from how it was phrased in the prior RTP policy. And what this means is now our new policy recognizes that none of us are perfect and none of us are born knowing how to do this, right? And as those of us who've been here for a long time can attest, students change, right? Students have changed multiple times since they've been here, and we have to continue pivoting to reach our students in the best possible way. So for example, let's say you have, as happened to me one semester in particular, I had a few students who all of a sudden were saying, oh, we don't like this class. Dr. Berquist is telling us what we should be learning. We want to have a say in what we're studying. This was in about 2016. And of course, I was kind of shocked. I said, wow, I'm the person with the PhD here. Why are they wanting to decide what is included in class? But then I thought about it, and I realized that what they were saying was essentially that they wanted to constitute more of our classroom environment, right? They wanted to have a little bit more of a say. It didn't mean I was going to throw out all my lectures and change my entire course material, but it did mean that I started giving informal mid-semester evaluations where I let the students just tell me how I'm doing, right? What do they want? What don't they want? And then I was able to respond, right? So what I learned this time was that the students said, wow, this is way too much work. So I was able to cut back on some of the reading, right? So under our new policy, showing and discussing that process is a benefit, right? It shows that in that moment, I had my back up against the wall. The students weren't so happy with what was going on, and I took action and I changed based on their feedback. So that is now viewed by us as a positive thing, right? We're not expecting you to be perfect right away. We want you to work with your students and work with your environment. And then also the third principle you want to discuss in your narrative are the use of instructional practices that foster student learning and the achievement of course goals. So what do I mean by that? Obviously, everything you do in class is hopefully fostering student learning. But when we're talking about the achievement of course goals, I'm thinking back to the standard course outlines, right? At the end of the semester of History 595, students will know how to write a literature review of 10 books, synthesizing the latest work in the discipline, right? That's my goal for the class. And when I'm writing my narrative about how I taught that class, I might back it up and say exactly to the different steps I took to get the students there. Let me quit out of that for a second and see if we have any questions on this. Okay. And some further tips for how you might want to discuss instruction and instructionally related activities. Again, demonstrate your continuous professional learning. Discuss your use of formative assessment in your teaching. So if you're not really familiar with these terms, when we're talking about formative assessment, we're talking about low stakes ways to assess student progress and understanding. For example, discussion boards, really small quizzes that are worth 2 points, things like that. These are ways not only for you to see how your students are progressing, but also for students to give you feedback on your work in class. How is that exactly? Because, for example, if they all do poorly on their little small quiz, then that is information for you, right? To tell you, oh, I might need to change how I'm teaching about this particular area. And then again, you'll also want to talk about your summative assessments. Summative assessments are essentially the bigger assignments that check student progress and understanding at the end of a course. So for example, in my field of history, that might be a comprehensive final exam or a large research paper, right? So those are different ways you can talk about what you're doing in the classroom. This slide is important because I think this is, at least from all the years I've been working on equity and transparency in the RTP process, how student evaluations play into it is certainly one of the most sticky areas. So first I'll say that we all know and recognize that our student evaluations or our spot forms, right? Students' perceptions on teaching, that our spot forms are a flawed instrument, right? We all recognize that they are sometimes a place for students to just complain. We've read the research that says that if you are a woman faculty member, if you're a faculty member of color, if you are a non-native English speaker, if you're differently abled, if you have children, if you're LGBTQ+, there's all these different things that sometimes can cause students to unfairly evaluate you, right? And we recognize that, and that is a real problem. At the same time, we have two important reasons why we need to keep our student perceptions on teaching and our student evaluation summaries in our files. First, our collective bargaining agreement with the California Faculty Association, with our union, says that we need to include student evaluations in RTP and evaluations. So we can't get out of that. That's our agreement with the union. So that, in the sense, is showing us we have no choice but to include student evaluations in RTP. The other reason is that students want to know that they have a say, right? And we value what students have to say. If we get, for example, kind of uniformly negative feedback about a certain class, this could be useful information, right? To help the instructor, the department chair, maybe even the dean think about what to do next, or whether there were other structural issues or challenges in the class. So even though they're most people's least favorite part of the RTP file, the student evaluations cannot be taken out of it entirely. So what are some tips for how you might want to discuss the feedback you received on your instruction? First, I would recommend that if you did poll your students informally or collect mid-semester feedback, as I talked about doing with my students back in 2016, you can discuss that feedback and then discuss how you used it to improve, right? And hopefully improve your evaluation scores. Another way you can talk about the feedback you received on your instruction is to actually have a colleague or mentor observe you in the classroom. So say you have, as all of us have at one point, once you've been here for long enough, a semester where things go off the rails in a certain class, not because of anything you did, just because of something that happens and the students become unhappy and you're in this contentious situation. A way you can sometimes get a little more insight on that is to have a colleague or a mentor observe you in the classroom, right? And then again, in your RTP narrative, you could talk about how what they observed and what they shared with you after their observation, how you used that to improve and or change your teaching. Another thing you can do is include examples of completed student work. Why? That helps show what the value of your assignments were, what kind of assignments you're making. Of course, if you are to do that, we suggest that you also include the assignment and the grading rubric so your evaluators can have some context. Another thing you may want to discuss with your instruction is whether you have solicited any formative feedback. For example, did you participate in a faculty learning community or the faculty formative feedback project, Beach Mentor, or Asset to gain more insight into your teaching? And if so, how did this affect your instruction? Another thing to point out is that, of course, as I already said, your spot scores are a mandatory part of your file. Therefore, in most cases, it's a good idea to address them. If you feel, for example, that they might have been better, this is your opportunity to explain why, and more importantly, to show how you worked to improve. And remember, student evaluations can be biased, really for two main buckets of reasons. The first we call environmental factors. right? If you've ever taught a class at 8 a.m., you know that no matter what you do, a lot of your 20-year-olds who are in there just do not want to be here on campus at 8 a.m., so they're not happy. That's not your issue, that is an environmental issue. Others, location, do students find where the class is on campus inconvenient? The topic, here I'm sort of referring to maybe you're teaching what we sometimes call a gatekeeping course, right? A course that's known to be hard, that's required for all majors, that students are dreading. Students in that type of course are naturally going to give you different reviews than if they're choosing an upper division course in their area of specialization. Bias in student evaluation also comes from what we call equity factors. And this is what I already spoke about, right? For example, students may evaluate women, faculty of color, and differently abled faculty, other faculty groups, etc., differently based on their identity. So here, when you are receiving equity bias in your student evaluations, there's nothing you can do about it, right? I can't change the fact that I'm a woman, and maybe some of the students in my history classes don't like that I'm a woman teaching history. But if I believe that my student evaluations have been impacted by this, I can discuss that in my file. So we're welcoming you now. If you feel that you have suffered in this area due to factors beyond your control, we're welcoming you now to talk about it. So again, candidates who believe that their student evaluations have been impacted by any of these factors may choose to use their narratives to address their student evaluation scores, among other things, right? Don't write the entire narrative about your student evaluation scores. Candidates should also be aware that provision 11.2 of the collective bargaining agreement states that instructors may submit written rebuttals to student course evaluations when they believe that additional information is needed, quote, or in the case of student bias. If such a rebuttal is submitted, it is incumbent upon the evaluating committee to review it. Let me close out of this for a second and see if anyone has questions about this part. Okay, great. I appreciate everyone saving their questions for later. They won't be recorded and we'll have more time to speak about them.
Emily, I think there's a question in the
Oh,
chat.
there is. Okay, yes, please. Are we required to submit graded work or can we just submit the assignment and the rubric? I don't believe that you have to submit graded work, Teresa. I think it could be either, but I would suggest that you submit the graded work because again, then you're showing your reviewers another piece of what you do, right? What kind of feedback you're
Sure.
giving.
So thanks, Emily. Would it just be one, because like, let's say you have 20 students, you don't submit, do you submit 20 graded assignments or just a
Right.
sample graded
Yeah,
work?
just a sample will work. Unless someone requests specifically that you include every single piece of student work from that class, which I've never heard of happening.
Okay.
Just one or two should be great. You're really just,
Okay.
you know, specifically, what do I do? How do I teach in my field? What are my assignments like? How do I grade my students?
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? Okay, great. So we are getting to the end here of my portion of presenting, and then we'll turn over to questions. So another thing that now we discuss in the instruction and instructionally related activities parts of our narrative is mentorship, right? And mentoring students, as we all know, is an important part of what we do on our campus, and there are many different ways to do this. Internships, theses, honors degrees, independent studies, graduate students, student clubs, other student initiatives, right? All that work we're doing with them is mentoring, and that is an instructionally related activity. You may also have participated in any specific mentoring programs, Europe, Build, the Honors Program, and of course, the Beach Mentor Program. And did you make a special contribution to mentoring specific groups of underserved students? And here again, yes, I'm referring to cultural and or identity and or race-based taxation. If you have experienced that, and that meant that you were spending a lot more time mentoring our students, working one-on-one with our students, that's an essential part of what makes our university great. So we encourage you to talk about that.
Question, Emily.
Yes.
So this counts for like if we're mentoring students one-on-one, right? Just like during our office hours, this is something that we can put in our
Yeah.
narrative.
Yeah,
Okay.
you could. I mean, I think I would be specific, right? I don't necessarily think just saying, lots of students came to my office hours would help. But if
Right.
you have a specific group that's coming to you, and you're spending, particular time with them, they're connecting with you on a particular issue, I think that would be great to talk about.
Awesome. And then sorry, lastly, in terms of I'm also in the training right now with you that you're hosting, the pedagogy excellence training.
Yes.
So like that we can also mention in our narrative as well. Okay.
Yes.
Monster.
Any faculty center groups that you're participating in, right? So that one is helping you think about how to be inclusive in your pedagogy. So I would talk about that in my narrative about my instruction and instructionally related activities.
Beautiful. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Anyone else?
I have another question related to this.
Oh.
So if and we are including all of this in our instruction, but let's say if this also amounts to a publication or a presentation at a conference, then can we separate that portion into RISCA and then say that came from this
Yes.
related? Yes.
Yeah. We have much more flexible categories of what's RISCA now, right? So now we recognize what we call the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning as RISCA as well. So that might be, in my field, we have journals that are not necessarily producing new research, but they're teaching, they're sort of presenting research in a way that's more accessible for secondary teachers, right? So if you published in a journal like that, you could include that under your RISCA, or if you chose, you could include it under instruction and instructionally related activities.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. I'm almost at the end here, and then we'll open up for questions. So how are you going to talk about your research, scholarly, and creative activity, or your RISCA? First and most important to know is that departments and colleges set RISCA standards. And we are trying to move away from quantifying you need X number of peer-reviewed publications, but we still have some policies that indicate that. So this is why your first stop is going to be your department chair, your department RTP policy, your department committee, just to make sure that your work is aligned with those expectations. When you're talking about your RISCA, you want to highlight how you have built on projects over time, right? You have sustained contributions to your field. I think here one of the things that evaluators are wanting to see is that, it wasn't just, if you say you're going up for full, it's not just that, you completed your dissertation and published a series of articles or a monograph based on that dissertation, and then you stopped. It's that you've continued working in various ways over time. You want to take the lead in clearly articulating your contribution to your field. Again, so I'll take my example in the history department, being the only person who works on colonial Latin America, one of very few people who focus on the early modern period. When it was time for me to write about my research, I really needed to articulate why it's valuable to learn about the Spanish Atlantic world in the early modern period. And I can do that in a way that no one else in my department can, because I have that disciplinary expertise. So don't be afraid of that. Another thing you're going to want to think about is explaining how your RISCA aligns with the job description for which you were hired and how your RISCA meets the needs of your department. So you're hired to teach a specific thing. You're hired to contribute to a specific body of knowledge, and you do that, you're going to want to talk about that in your file. Another thing that you may choose to talk about would be if you have received any external or internal grants, at what levels you received them, and what the outcomes were. And this, again, this culture really varies. In some colleges, this is not that common. In others, it is. So you're going to want to be aware of just the standards that you're working with. Of course, any RISCA outputs you're going to want to discuss, publications, conferences, symposiums, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I'll just reiterate again, always start with your department policy for guidance when you're talking about your RISCA. Let me see if anyone has any general questions on this. Okay, great. I will move forward. Again, to reiterate for like the 15th time, we recognize a continuum of scholarship. And we know now that RISCA can be much more than just traditional peer-reviewed publications. For example, your RISCA may be scholarship of engagement, going out into the community, helping to execute community projects and studies, working to get laws and regulations changed. That can be scholarship of engagement. We already talked about the scholarship of teaching and learning, right? Instead of producing historical knowledge, you're producing knowledge about how to teach history. That also counts as RISCA under our new policy. And of course, don't forget, everything we do here at the beach is ultimately about our students and promoting their success. So if your RISCA involves students and promotes their success, you are highly encouraged to discuss that. We're getting to the end here, and I put in our cute little photo of a student from Basic Needs dressed as an avocado to remind us that we're almost at the end. So service, how are we to talk about service? Again, faculty are expected to make meaningful service contributions. For tenure, right? So when you're in your first 5-6 years on campus, very often candidates will focus on department and college service. Of course, this varies depending on your department and or your college. But for example, in the history department, when I was hired, my chair was very clear that she did not want us serving on university committees. She wanted us to keep it local and focus on what the department needed. So if that's the directive you were given, you can discuss that and explain that's how you performed your service. By the time you are going up for promotion to full professor, you typically are demonstrating university level service as well. So by that, I mean university level committees, academic senate, faculty policies and personnel council, that type of thing. Remember, your service can also include service to the profession. And this is, again, as I mentioned earlier, something where you get to choose, right? Do you want to count, say you're an editor of a journal. Do you want to count that under RISCA, or do you want to count it under service? And that is a decision up to you. And I would say use it wherever you think it will benefit you the most. If your service category is lighter than your RISCA category, put that journal editorship in the service category. Remember, as we already talked about, our service does not just have to be to Cal State Long Beach, it can also be to our local community. When you're talking about your service, you are advised to tell us your role and list specific initiatives you worked on and outcomes they produced, right? Be detailed, not too detailed, but detailed enough for us to understand what kind of work you are undertaking. And again, give us a sense of how much time and effort you put into this work. If you did something that required multiple hours a week over the course of a year or several years, you should most definitely include that. And again, remember, because it does pop up in service quite a bit, that cultural identity and race-based taxation is in fact recognized under our new RTP policy. If you performed additional service because of this, you are welcome to address that in your narrative. So that concludes the presentation portion of our workshop today. Thank you so much for spending time with us. If you have any questions, please contact myself, contact Simone. If it's a question that we can't answer, we will forward you on to Faculty Affairs. And just remember, your best first stop for all these questions about expectations in your department, expectations in your college, is always going to be your department chair. So I am going to stop recording.